Welcome to the Unriveted podcast, where we talk about technology, where the intersections of digital transformation, artificial intelligence, and people all come together. This episode is brought to you by the Substack blog, What Did OpenAI Do This Week? Hey, John.
Hey, Martin, how are you doing? I see it's Happy Aloha Friday. We got our Aloha shirts on today. We did inform our guest, our special guest of this, so don't hold it against him. But today on Unriveted, we are joined by a special guest, Josh Miramant, CEO and founder of Blue Orange Digital, a data science and machine learning agency. And as we typically tend to do on the show, we'll turn it over to you, Josh, and you can give us a little intro on yourself. But I think we've already identified one of the topics we want to cover, which is large language models, LLMs, generative AI, and some of the commercial implications of those models today, as well as maybe discussing where you see them going in the future. So without further ado, Josh, welcome to Unriveted. Great to have you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Martin. Really great to connect here. It's exciting to share a little bit of some of the work we're doing. So yeah, I'm Josh Miramant. I, as mentioned, founded Blue Orange Digital. So just a quick about us and my background. Came out as working as a data engineer and built a couple companies, and really was in that actually at the really good time about 7 years ago, in a great intersection of working with data and kind of commercializing that data on the SaaS companies I was starting with in the enterprise. When I sold the IP of that company, kind of naturally led into services work. So perfect timing, as the world has changed to be very data centric. But we at Blue Orange have been really focused around helping companies understand their digital journey, how to build out data infrastructure through data engineering, analytics, and advanced modeling, so AI and machine learning. So we're a kind of team of practitioners helping both on the consulting and technical implementation side of that. And it's been amazing to see in the last few years, but more recently, last feels like 6 months or 6 months and dog years as it stands, to see all the evolution of so many companies and the excitement around what we've been, I think, John, you and I connected a few years, been screaming at the top of our lungs of what could be happening here. Now we're saying like, oh, and all the excitement and tapping into it. So a lot of interesting areas of excitement that we've been focusing on lately. Yeah.
Right. The change has happened exponentially. It seemed to be rather linear, I think, just 5, maybe 3, maybe even 2 years ago. And then it seems like when ChatGPT came out and all the publicity that it received, and ChatGPT is obviously not the first iteration of a large language model. It's like the 3.5 version, I guess, GPT 3.5. Yeah. And we already have GPT-4 out there for, I guess, commercial use. It's been opened up to that group, but it's definitely changed exponentially. So, I guess I'll start things off. Thanks for the intro, Josh, obviously. And like I said, glad to have you here. But, you've been with Blue Digital for, I think, according to LinkedIn, it's been about 8 years, right?
Yeah. It's been amazing.
So I'm interested then, in your experience over time, what have you seen? What are the changes that you've seen, in your experience? How has that increased, or the changes occurred more rapidly? What are your, clients, and you don't have to call any clients out specifically, but, what do you see the trends moving to, and what your business is going to have to maybe adapt to in order to enter this new world and stay relevant?
Great focus. It's actually nice to start looking at, 8 years is actually a trend span in such a fast moving environment. So you're able to see not just the rise and fall of different tool sets, but different patterns in technical data transformation efforts. But even with the rise of, ML and AI models and large language models and all these things, it's even how people are thinking and applying it. So a lot of trends to look at. Where Blue Orange sits, and I think where my background is really sitting on the commercial applications. We work with a lot of businesses thinking about applying this for really helping apply either business efficiency, automation, or deeper insights, that decision making process. We spend a lot of time in the analytics problem, And it's a really fun space to see because I think we've watched I think I entered in as at the dawn of the era of the modern data stack, I think it was called, and it's just this new set of tools where there was a demand in the commercial space or in the corporate environment, enterprise application of data. And this is not a new demand, but every feels like 8 to 10 years, we retool ourselves to solve the same set of problems in a different way. And so there's centralized versus decentralization arguments. There's, what tooling and structure, how you denorm and normalize data structures. These things feel like cyclical patterns all the time. But what we're really moving into and what I've been able to see is a transition into people expecting, having to do less work for more. This is always a trend in IT, and that's been consistent with data. So you're seeing that with at core. It used to say, okay, let's lake all your data, instead of leaving it on-prem or owning it to outsourcing your data services, let's lake it, make it raw, and then you have every potential data opportunity. And a lot of companies did that direction, and you saw a swing of that pendulum to data ownership, and I think it's crucial and necessary as a starting point. But we've actually come back from that in a place where you can still own your data, but you get managed servicing on top of it with the Databricks and Snowflake servicing layer on top of it. And now we're seeing the capability of the same thing happening in machine learning with the commercialized application of Gen AI and LLMs, led by ChatGPT, really opening up how this can be applied to evolve automation and evolve task function. It's at the early days, but is now starting to see, instead of having to go raw into a data environment, take a untrained model and train it from scratch, and have lower confidence intervals and getting that, fighting the scale of fine tuning to the nth degree, which is very complicated. 80% comfortable tuning, but getting that last 20% for core business value is very expensive. We're now seeing these large pre-trained models starting to take the complexity out of having to start from scratch. And so now it's opening up a large use case environment, just like data ownership was. That became something in the last 5 to 7 years. And I think this area of MML, like machine learning and LLMs, are just opening the recourse of what the commercial value exists around these large pre-trained models. And I think we sit at a really interesting area. So, I think there's a lot of talk about what ChatGPT did, where it made it commercially or consumer interesting. So you can understand that, wow, this stuff is really advanced. This is really cool. You can understand it generating, movie scripts and creativity and things that we thought, white collar jobs we never thought would ever be replaced. But I think the actual real interesting piece in here, and we're sitting at this kind of very, I think complicated landscape of how commercial versus open source models, and talk about that in a minute. But we're sitting at this area where what is super compelling about what we have is a huge jump in technology for bringing opening unstructured and semi-structured data to provide what is the core driving of a lot of the business value of these models. And that's become, the barrier to entry has decreased so much on that, and the quality has decreased so high for a couple pretty technical reasons. We now have so many more use cases available. And I think that's what we do a lot of our work on that is compelling, is stuff that before would have been so cost prohibitive, even for the largest enterprise, we're able to knock out in weeks. It's truly like the ability for doing classification problems and translation problems under the hood, the stuff that companies wouldn't even tackle because it was fraught with the inherent challenges of completing a data project and getting adoption. Now we're able to do it in less time with an interface of linguistics and just semantic interaction. So it's a really cool time to see those kind of become the norm of what people are able to tackle, and a decreased barrier for entry, opening up access.
This is really awesome, Josh. One observation I've made, and I think this shows up within your company too, is this. I think it's a step and repeat opportunity where there's a vertical or a focus that has a large document set. Let's say 1 million plus PDF documents or all types of documents, and you want to get sentiment, analysis, typographical information. And there's just like a step and repeat opportunity for jumping through the documentation and coming up with solutions based on that document set. And any thoughts around that? Because it seems like that exact problem is a step and repeat. And I can give you all kinds of examples, like legal briefs, legal documentation,
Hmm.
creative writer intent, tax codes, tax intent,
Yep.
go 50 states. I give you three step and repeat examples. Any experience around solving these kind of problems?
Yeah, you've almost identically summarized really well what the areas I'm getting into. But so yeah, let me give a couple examples, and I'm happy to kind of talk about some specific use cases because I think it will kind of illuminate kind of the advances and talk about some of the technology that really aided that. But what I hear, Martin, you talking about is a really interesting framing that we think a lot about when we approach a project, but particularly on the automation application of machine learning. But it's this concept of the anatomy of a task, right? You have and it will sound very similar to model training because there's reasons why neural nets follow that work path, but you have, input, and then you get prediction, and then there's judgment, and there's action, there's an outcome, and then it draws back in with training. And that's kind of the pieces that have been archetyped to the anatomy of a task. And you look at a few areas like, RPA, really great at taking a function and doing the action component, our robotic process automation. It's pretty dumb, but it's pretty, that simple repeat function adds incredible amount of value. And what we've seen with the improvement of higher quality machine learning models is a decrease in cost of prediction and an increase in quality of prediction. So we have actions are kind of being handled pretty well, but we get single model predictors have really been plummeting in cost and increasing in accuracy. So that actually is really impressive, and that's why data has become more valued. But what you honed in on there is a great point, and I think what we're seeing with a couple components coming out in the like LLMs as example is they're making it considerably easier to get higher quality predictions. So what, if you think about kind of where, and I think there's a component of what we see now, like a chat or a search or classification, which LLMs are phenomenally good on executing on unstructured text, which is, or unstructured LLM specifically on text, but other multimodal environments allow for more data to be pulled in. What's amazing is prediction is allowed to be brought, a prediction and decision with a semantic context is allowed to be chained together. And so the expansion of prediction of where we're able to automate, we're no longer just saying, okay, what is the action? Do I have that information? We can layer on a semantic layer which expands the capacity of prediction, not just from a single task, but to a chain of tasks. And that's where the next promise, I think there's this, I think it's termed mostly around like LLM agents or that idea of having a semantic context, a decision, and then another trigger action. And so you can linear connect different stages of a task. That's a nonlinear expansion of the capacity of an anatomy of a task here. It is amazing how much the capacity, and we have built actions specifically back to what kind of the example you were getting at. So, for example, for a project we have as one of our clients is one of the largest OEM automotive manufacturers in the world, and there's a number of standards that they've had sitting on a bunch of unstructured tasks. So think about the complexity about a supply chain of that vast complexity. There are thousands of parts from different providers, and they need standards, but they've had 10 standards in the past. There's different version controls of it. Even just the simplicity of the complexity you could imagine of saying building a NLP model and classifying it to understand the difference and nuance between what is both structured and semi-structured text and some unstructured like PDFs from years past, and needing to arrive at an ontology on the new standard they have. Before, that was a heavy effort of building very training heavy data sets that was almost prohibitive, that you actually couldn't beat human translation on. And so the idea of building a unstructured framework of that, or the data off of unstructured data, would be so complex that it just wasn't really worth it. So a semantic trained, pre-trained model, like what we're dealing with LLMs now, are able to take in the course of just last layer training, so really low data effort, it can understand the output it's going for and bring a semantic context to provide to the other models. So that first stage has been super powered by such a vast training set and the embeddings on that model. And so now we're able to just work on the contextual and the individual. And so a project that would be human prohibitive just because it wouldn't compete with human translation now actually becomes a weeks-long project, and you're able to focus on the value creation of standardization, the error rate detection, improved classification, like these areas that actually have core business value. And so that's the thing that we're uncovered, which we wouldn't even have tackled the problem, 2 years ago. And now it's something that we can do, we can scope and deliver in a quarter. It's a very exciting time. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And you touched on so many different things that I'd like to ask follow-up questions on there, but I got to pick and choose to keep within the sake of timing. But one of the concepts that I think keeps coming up, and again, your mention of LLM agents, right?
Mm.
How do we go from simple prompt with a question, receive an answer? That's kind of the limit that people see tools like ChatGPT, or I guess any language model, is asking a question and it will give you a response, right? And some of those responses may be hallucinations. It may sound great, but I've actually been accused of doing human hallucinations before, where it's like, boy, you really sound now. I'm like, I don't know if that's true. They're like, if you didn't tell me that you didn't think that was true, John, I would have believed everything you were saying. So, but I do. Maybe I should just stop prefacing that when I say it. But we see tools like Chainlit, LangChain, LangFlow, Jarvis, aka Hugging Face GPT. So you're seeing this expansion of tools that are based off of just the large language model, where we can actually instead of just getting this question and answer type of interface, where it becomes an interface for a much broader ecosystem of tools, where behind the scenes, you can get your simple question and answer, but you can also interface with the tool in your native language. Doesn't necessarily have to be English, I suppose, but work in your native language to achieve results and actually have these AI agents go out and perform tasks in real time when you ask them. So, from your opinion and what you're seeing and what you're reading and maybe what your clients are asking, do you see the way that people are interfacing with computers, in a very general sense, ultimately, changing, so that like an operating system like Windows or Linux or iOS, where we don't, in 20 years, we're like, those are relics of the past, because now we don't even, we don't even have keyboards. We just have fancy microphones and ask our computer to do this, and this. Where do you kind of see LLMs as a pure interface going in the future of this area?
Yeah, a fantastic question. It's really important to, I think there's a couple of things to say on that. So, answering the question directly, and I think it unpacks a lot of pieces. I do think we are going to interact with a new interface with how we handle complex computing. There's no question about it. There's no difference in interacting with a LLM or ChatGPT or anything than what we've seen with abstraction programming languages forever. It's like, we used to code in C, and now we have semantic sugar across everything. We use the most abstracted layer. We always move to the power of simplicity. That's just everything that we've seen here. And we have a newer, simpler quality semantic interface that we can do. I don't think we're going to stop personally at just talking or like linguistic text. I think that multimodal solutions are going to be far more sophisticated, where you're operating in an environment where whatever you're interfacing with, in addition not only to textual semantics, you're also dealing with what you see and what you hear. I mean, that's where the real power becomes. So I think that interface is really compelling. The interim to this, though, before it becomes what that looks like, I'm as much of a futurist as you, so I think it's just that's the fun of the aggregate. We'll find that out. What I find really compelling in the interim is and particularly around the weaknesses of LLMs. And, we've allowed ourselves to move in where there's hallucination, there's data parity problems, there's training retraining problems, where you get actually trains out of its own data and comes back on. It's like there's a lot of problems that can exist with the strengths of LLM. You see this environment that comes in where they're able to train on unstructured text really well, which is and to operate in a semantic interface and stuff that is so, and particularly textual semantic unstructured, but still incredibly powerful, to see how much that opens up. But there's a thing that we've spent a lot of time working on in the structured space, which I find incredibly compelling. There's some really good literature out about particularly I spent a lot of time in commercial use, but just think that those are the most powerful application. the overlap of a knowledge graph, which is really smart, and that's a lot of work we've done with building ontology and building structure semantic layers that align with a business purpose. But the strengths and weaknesses of a knowledge graph really are quite the opposite to the strengths and weaknesses of an LLM. And there's some really interesting work to start where you're getting really robust knowledge graphs being kind of interplayed with LLMs. I think we're going to sit on an environment that has considerably reduced amount of hallucinations. We get high accuracy and confidence, things that aren't necessarily the strengths of generally trained general purpose LLMs. And so I think that the near term, when you're thinking about how you solve what is the biggest weakness of these applications, and then tailor it to what is private, proprietary, and ultimately the last layer of high value data, you kind of have this interplay between LLMs and knowledge graph, creating the perfect ecosystem of strengths and weaknesses to provide a robust, highly accurate, highly confident environment. And there's a lot of approaches to do it, like the way in which you need to think about the kind of future that exists. Like, will there be large language models like OpenAI's and Bards and Titans with AWS and all these different models, and Anthropic? Like, will they own the market space, or will it be a very fragmented, localized, privately trained ecosystem? Right. I tend to think more toward the latter, particularly because I look at what a proprietary LM is much more like a coding framework now than it is a peak model. And there's room for a lot, but I think there's an interesting future of training local models, coupling it with knowledge graph, and getting this robust ecosystem. Like, the path to that operating system replacement that you're talking about is through something much more like a localized, highly trained, highly accurate, curtailed environment, specifically applied, servicing biomedical solutions, or helping a supply chain decrease predictive failure and increase shipping accuracy, and it knows very well to the machine spec how to apply that. And I think that future is now, candidly. Like, we are building those types of, the agents are the layers of automation on top of it. That's the RPA enhancement. But the ontology underneath is that combination of semantic understanding of highly curtailed and personalized information. So the wow factor was highly generalizable LLMs, and that's what OpenAI splashed in the market space with. The exciting play is highly tailored, private or not, that's a security protocol, but highly tailored, highly proprietary applications of these systems. In that, we are not far off of people saying there's no way you can't have one of those environments tailored in your system.
This has been very insightful, Josh. And what I'd like to start on here is, as we wrap up, is if you had to give advice to a younger version of yourself today, think about what you know today and rewind, what would you tell the younger version of Josh what to do early career?
Well, I read an article recently that a company replaced their CEO with an LLM, and it performed better on abstract decisions. So I'd say pick a different career, because us white collar guys are going out. I kid. I think that I'll frame it this way. One of the things I love about agency work, which I find, and this isn't quite your question, but I think we'll get there, is for the success of our company is to stay completely, to develop enough knowledge to be very opinionated, but also to stay open-minded to keep up with what's new. And so I always love that saying, like, strong opinions loosely held. I think it's a guiding axiom that I've always tried to apply. Like, be aware enough and educated enough to get that knowledge so that you can understand the decisions that are good or bad for each application, but make sure there's room for evolution. And so I love working with a range of different clients in this space particularly, because that's a requisite for it. And I think hot-headed young Josh was incredibly opinionated, but the loosely held part was less developed. So I think that idea of both being open to the newness and staying with it while you develop expertise is an ever-balancing challenge. So I think that would be my takeaway.
That's awesome, Josh. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
As we close out here, this is a big thank you from the Unriveted crew. And that's a wrap, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks all.
Thanks,
Right.
Martin. Thanks,
Thanks,
John.
Josh.